At 3:15 in the morning, while hackers from Belarus were attempting to breach a pharmaceutical company's research database, I removed my headset and stood up from my desk. Not out of fear. Not because the situation overwhelmed me, but because they'd just shown me I was valued at $5,000 while my colleague Derek was apparently worth $42,000 for accomplishing half as much. My name's Ophelia Rivers. I'm 44 and until 2 months ago I spent my nights monitoring network security infrastructure in Seattle, ensuring cybercriminals didn't compromise sensitive medical data while the rest of Washington state slept soundly in their beds. I didn't leave in some theatrical display of fury. I didn't throw equipment across the room, deliver an epic resignation speech, or cause a scene anyone would gossip about during lunch breaks. I departed the way you exit a structure that's been slowly suffocating you for 19 years. Deliberately, carefully, and with this peculiar sense of lightness once that crushing burden no longer belonged to me. It began with a retention bonus announcement on a Tuesday afternoon. The kind that sounds like good corporate news but is really just institutional panic dressed up in professional language. I worked the overnight cybersecurity monitoring shift for Helion Technical Solutions, a medium-sized contractor handling network defense for healthcare organizations. Nothing particularly prestigious about the work itself. When a security breach got past our initial defenses at 2:45 a.m., my phone would vibrate and I'd be the person analyzing packet captures, implementing firewall rules, and preventing someone's confidential medical records from ending up for sale on the dark web. Day shift received recognition and advancement opportunities. Night shift received criticism when anything went wrong. Fairly typical arrangement in this industry. We had a compact team handling overnight coverage. 6 of us rotating schedules throughout the week. 3 were competent professionals who understood the technical complexities. 1 was recently graduated, still developing his skills. 1 seemed perpetually occupied with tasks that never quite materialized into actual results. And then there was Derek Carlson. Derek was 31, team lead for the daytime crew, and he possessed this ability to make complex security incidents sound trivial. Always casual, always presenting this demeanor like the job was nothing more than following basic procedures. He'd make statements like, "Don't overthink it, Ophelia. Management understands who keeps this operation running." Meanwhile, I was the one who identified the 0-day vulnerability that nearly compromised our largest client's patient database last Thanksgiving weekend while he was at some craft brewery posting food pictures on Instagram. So when Amaya Sloan, our director of security operations, scheduled an all-hands meeting about retention bonuses for essential personnel, I already understood how this scenario would unfold. I'd been in this industry long enough to recognize the pattern. Verbal appreciation costs the company nothing. Losing people costs everything. Amaya delivered the whole warm and reassuring performance. We're making significant investments in our workforce. We want to appropriately reward dedication and acknowledge our most indispensable contributors. Indispensable contributors. I nearly laughed at the absurdity of that phrase. I'd been protecting their systems for nearly 2 decades, mentoring new analysts, maintaining security frameworks that should have been completely overhauled years ago. If indispensable meant anything substantial, it meant this person's departure would create immediate and severe operational problems. After the meeting, Amaya contacted people individually to communicate the specific amounts privately. Strategic approach. Much harder for employees to compare compensation when you handle it that way. Derek received his notification first. Returned to our team channel with this calculated false modesty. Everyone honestly. I wasn't expecting anything like this. They really demonstrated some serious appreciation. Then he sent me a direct message with a screenshot like he'd won some kind of lottery. $42,000. Actual cash bonus, not equity options, not compensatory time off. Real money accompanied by a retention agreement requiring him to stay 18 months. He added, "Told you, Ophelia. They recognize who delivers value around here." My stomach performed something distinctly unpleasant. Not jealousy precisely. More like this dawning realization because I already knew exactly what my number was going to be. Amaya contacted me 40 minutes later. Video-enabled, rehearsed smile firmly in place. "First, Ophelia, I want to express genuine gratitude. You've been such a stabilizing presence on the night shift for so many years." I nodded because that's the expected response. You acknowledge these things when people speak them aloud. We're offering you a retention bonus as well. We're genuinely excited about this recognition." She paused like she anticipated some kind of enthusiastic reaction from me. $5,000. I stared at her through the webcam and felt this peculiar cold sensation spread through my chest. Not immediate anger. More like this profound embarrassment on her behalf. Like she just articulated exactly what she believed my professional worth amounted to and expected me to express gratitude for her honesty. "All right," I said because I couldn't trust my voice to produce any other words. Amaya's smile tightened slightly around the edges. "I want you to understand this reflects budget allocation constraints, not your performance quality. You're incredibly valued here, Ophelia." "Certainly. Valued at approximately the price of a decent used motorcycle." When the call ended, I remained seated in my home office with the lights off, monitors casting blue illumination across the room, listening to my son upstairs practicing violin for his youth orchestra audition. 16 years old and more disciplined than most adults I'd worked with. His private lessons alone cost me $200 monthly, and I'd been gradually depleting what little I'd managed to save for retirement to cover the difference. I opened my personal financial spreadsheet, the one where I track everything from mortgage payments to utility bills, and entered $5,000 in a cell. Then I entered $42,000 directly beneath it. Not to torture myself psychologically. Simply to observe it in plain numerical terms. 2 weeks earlier, Derek had completely missed a critical intrusion detection alert because he'd been distracted during a client presentation. I was the one who noticed it during our shift handover, properly escalated the incident, and prevented our client from experiencing a ransomware deployment during their busiest operational hours. Amaya had sent a company-wide email praising everyone for maintaining our exceptional security standards. Now I was being offered what amounted to discretionary spending money to contractually obligate myself to another 18 months of watching other people receive credit for my technical expertise. The genuine problem wasn't actually Derek. He was merely the most visible symptom of something I'd been deliberately ignoring for far too long. This represented a systemic pattern I'd been working around for 19 years, convincing myself it was temporary, that this is simply how overnight shifts function in corporate America. That Thursday night, approximately 10:45 p.m., our intrusion detection system began generating alerts. Started relatively minor, then escalated rapidly. Some organized group operating out of Eastern Europe was systematically probing one of our pharmaceutical clients' networks, testing for exploitable vulnerabilities in their research data repositories. Normally we'd implement our standard defensive procedures and escalate through established channels, but our incident response protocols were significantly outdated. Last time I'd recommended updating them, Amaya told me to concentrate on operational execution, not process optimization. My phone vibrated. Derek predictably. "Hey Ophelia, seeing some suspicious activity on the client monitoring dashboard. You have visibility on it." I examined the attack methodology developing across my screens. Examined the alert queue accumulating faster than I could properly address it. Then I opened that retention agreement Amaya had emailed me. 18 months minimum commitment. Immediate full repayment if I terminated employment early. Confidentiality clause regarding bonus amounts. Another clause stating that at-will employment status remains in effect. They wanted me contractually locked in, but they wanted to preserve their freedom to terminate me whenever circumstances suited them. The attack was intensifying. 4 different penetration vectors now, coordinated but sophisticated. These weren't amateur hackers. This represented professional-grade intrusion methodology. The kind that keeps pharmaceutical executives awake at night and gets security contractors sued into financial oblivion. I'd observed this pattern before. Always during holidays or weekends when the daytime shift was absent and it was just me and perhaps one other analyst maintaining coverage. Always when the people who received recognition weren't available to handle the actual consequences. My phone rang. Unknown number, but I recognized the country code. Belarus. I didn't answer it. That's not how professional intrusion operations work. Real attackers don't call to taunt you. They operate in silence and disappear before you fully comprehend what happened. But it communicated something significant. They knew someone competent was monitoring their activities. They knew someone skilled was on the defensive side of their attack. And they were attempting to create psychological pressure. At 12:30 a.m. I faced a decision. I could follow established protocol, escalate to Amaya, activate the incident response team, spend the next 5 hours explaining technical details to people who should already understand them. Or I could handle it independently like I'd been doing for 19 years. The professionally appropriate action was following protocol. Document everything, ensure everyone knew I'd done everything according to established procedures. Let the company experience the consequences of being understaffed and inadequately trained for overnight operations. Instead, I began comprehensive documentation. Screenshots of the attack vectors. Network traffic analysis logs. Timestamps demonstrating when alerts triggered and when I reported them. Not for the company's benefit. For my own protection. At 1:45 a.m. the attackers modified their approach. Instead of attempting to penetrate the research database, they began targeting our internal administrative infrastructure. The systems that controlled access credentials for all our clients' networks, not just one organization. That's when I understood this wasn't random opportunity. They'd been conducting reconnaissance on us. Learning our operational patterns. They knew our overnight coverage was minimal. They knew most of our security personnel worked day shifts exclusively. They knew precisely when to execute maximum impact with minimum resistance. My phone buzzed again. Dirk. Ophelia, this is becoming pretty serious. Should we involve Amaya? I stared at that message for an extended moment. Should we involve Amaya? The same Amaya who just informed me I was worth $5,000. The same Amaya who told me to focus on execution instead of improving our defensive capabilities. The same Amaya who was sleeping peacefully in her suburban house while cybercriminals attempted to steal protected health information. Your decision, I typed back. You're the team lead. 3 dots appeared, then vanished. Appeared again. Derek was composing something, then deleting it, then attempting again. Finally, I think you should contact her. You understand these systems better than anyone. There was the truth everyone recognized but nobody wanted to articulate openly. When situations became genuinely serious, when actual expertise was required, they came to me. The person worth $5,000. At 2:30 a.m., Amaya finally answered my escalation call. Voice thick with sleep and irritation. Is this genuinely urgent, Ophelia? I watched the attack escalate to the point where it would begin affecting client operations. Service level agreement violations, angry calls to executives, the complete mess. Yes, I said, and my voice was calm in a way that surprised me. How urgent? I examined my screens. Examined the retention agreement still open in another browser window. Examined the clock counting down to when this would become someone else's responsibility to explain to extremely angry people with extremely expensive legal representation. They've penetrated the administrative systems now. If they achieve root access, they'll possess credentials for everything. Every client, every database, every transaction. Silence on her end. Not the productive kind of silence where someone's processing information. The problematic kind where someone's realizing they're completely out of their depth. What do you need me to do? She asked. Nothing. Just wanted you to understand our current situation. Can you stop them? I'd neutralized worse intrusions with less warning and fewer resources. I'd been the person resolving situations like this for 2 decades while other people slept peacefully. Probably, I said. Then do whatever you need to do, Ophelia. Just resolve it. At 2:55 a.m., after 30 minutes of explaining technical details to her that she should have understood but didn't, she repeated it again. Just do whatever you need to do to resolve it, Ophelia. At 3:15 a.m. I stood up from my desk, disconnected my headset, and removed my security badge from the lanyard like I was removing something that had never truly belonged to me in the first place. And I walked away. I didn't panic afterward. Didn't spend the night staring at the ceiling wondering if I'd made a catastrophic mistake. My brain just felt quiet. Like I'd finally stopped trying to rationalize things that had never made sense to begin with. The thing about walking away from a cyber attack is that the attack doesn't terminate just because you're not there to defend against it. The Belarusian hackers didn't pack up and go home because Ophelia Rivers decided she was finished being undervalued. They kept working, kept probing, kept attempting to breach systems that were now defended by people who didn't understand how those systems actually functioned. I discovered later, much later, that it took them 4.5 hours to contain what I could have stopped in 40 minutes. 4.5 hours of protected health information at risk, 4.5 hours of service level agreement violations accumulating, 4.5 hours of Amaya and Robert Chin. Wait, let me correct that. Robert Sullivan, our VP of Technical Operations, running around frantically trying to understand why their overnight coverage had suddenly disappeared. By 7 a.m., they'd managed to secure the immediate threat, but the damage was substantial. Not just to the systems, to the company's reputation. When you're in cybersecurity, word travels rapidly. Other firms hear about major incidents. Clients begin asking uncomfortable questions. Insurance companies begin adjusting premiums and coverage terms. By early afternoon the next day, my phone was vibrating like an angry insect trapped in a jar. Slack messages first, then text messages, then missed calls from Amaya that she didn't bother following up with voicemails. When managers are confident in their position, they leave detailed messages explaining the situation. When they're frightened, they just keep calling repeatedly. I checked my work email once, simply to observe the damage. Overnight support tickets had accumulated like snowfall during a blizzard. The client in Germany had escalated to their chief information security officer. Another client was threatening to invoke penalty clauses in their service contract. Buried in my inbox was a calendar invitation titled, Critical Coverage Discussion. No agenda, no explanation. That's when my clarity sharpened into something cleaner. This wasn't sudden. It hadn't been one difficult night or a miscommunication. This was a pattern I'd been working around for 19 years, telling myself it was temporary, that this is simply how overnight shifts operate in corporate environments. I started collecting documentation. Not angrily, methodically. Performance evaluations, incident reports, security certifications I'd maintained using my own time and money. Every major threat I'd neutralized in the past 18 months had timestamps between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. The retention program documentation told its own story. The funding came from a discretionary budget Amaya controlled. Amounts weren't connected to performance metrics or seniority. They were connected to leadership perception, which meant who made the executives feel secure during standard business hours. Derek made them feel secure. I made problems disappear in the darkness where nobody had to think about them. The genuine revelation was buried on page 4 of the retention agreement. A clause about performance expectations during the commitment period. Essentially, if you signed the agreement, you were committing to the identical workload and responsibilities for 18 months, regardless of any changes in staffing levels, operational scope, or incident frequency. They weren't just purchasing your loyalty, they were purchasing your availability. For Derek, that meant 18 months of day shift work, regular hours, manageable stress levels. For me, that meant 18 months of being the only barrier standing between skilled cybercriminals and other people's sensitive data, every night for the price of a decent vacation. By Thursday afternoon, Robert Sullivan, our VP of Technical Operations, called me directly. I'd spoken to Robert exactly 4 times in 19 years, and every conversation occurred when something was already catastrophically wrong. Ophelia, he said, skipping any social pleasantries. We're experiencing some cascading problems from Tuesday night. Amaya says you have the most comprehensive understanding of our response protocols. Understanding. Not authority, not ownership. Understanding. I do, I said. Can you join a call with the team? Help us resolve this situation. I thought about that retention agreement sitting unsigned in my inbox. Thought about the repayment clause. Thought about Derek's screenshot and that $37,000 difference. I can, I said slowly. But I won't. Silence on his end. Long enough to communicate everything I needed to know. Why not? Robert asked. Because that's what the retention bonus was for. You made your determination about who's worth keeping employed. I'm respecting that decision. He exhaled hard through his nose. Irritated now, but attempting to maintain professionalism. Ophelia, this isn't the appropriate time for that conversation. It's precisely the time, Robert. You wanted to retain me for $5,000. This is what choosing not to stay looks like. We'll address this tomorrow, he said and disconnected the call. That's when everything accelerated dramatically. By Friday morning, our client status dashboard went from green to yellow to orange. Someone made the error of posting an update that mentioned internal resource constraints. Internal resource constraints meant personnel, and clients don't appreciate hearing that the people protecting their sensitive information aren't available. By Monday, Derek called me directly. Not a text message this time. An actual phone call. Ophelia, he said, and I could hear keyboard typing in the background. Look, I understand you're upset about the bonus situation, but we genuinely need your assistance here. Amaya's applying tremendous pressure, and honestly, I'm overwhelmed with some of this advanced technical material. There was not an apology. Not acknowledgement of the compensation disparity. Just need. You received the bonus, Derek. This is what it's for. He was quiet for several seconds. Come on. That's not reasonable. I almost smiled. You're absolutely right. It's not reasonable. It's just no longer my responsibility. Look, I recognize I don't understand the systems like you do. All that documentation you created, some of it's outdated and... Good luck figuring it out, I said and ended the call. By the following Wednesday, the company status dashboard was red. That's when leadership genuinely started to panic. Not because of the financial impact, because of the visibility. Red status dashboards make clients nervous. Nervous clients call executives. Executives don't appreciate being called at home. The beautiful irony was that the systems weren't actually malfunctioning. They were just undefended. Like a house with all the locks removed but the structure still standing. Everything appeared normal until someone attempted to test it. Thursday morning, Amaya emailed me directly. No carbon copies, no corporate language. Ophelia, we need to talk. What will it take? I read it twice, then composed 3 sentences in response. I'm open to discussing compensation alignment with industry standards for my experience level, clear advancement opportunities, and transition to day shift coverage. Until then, I'm not available for emergency support. This isn't punitive, it's professional. Within 90 minutes, Human Resources had joined the email thread. By afternoon, Legal was copied. They weren't there for me. They were there because someone had finally asked the obvious question. How does one person walking away collapse our entire overnight operation? That question doesn't lead to promotions and recognition. It leads to audits and investigations. By the following Monday, the internal narrative had shifted. People stopped asking me to return and started asking who approved what, when, and why. Someone noticed that night shift performance evaluations were systematically capped at meets expectations, regardless of actual performance outcomes. Someone else noticed that retention bonuses weren't documented against any objective criteria. Someone else noticed that Derek had signed his agreement just hours before an incident he couldn't manage independently. Robert scheduled a comprehensive process improvement review. Amaya stopped responding to internal communications altogether. And that's when it truly registered with me. They'd assumed I was gone. But I wasn't gone. The consequences of how they'd treated me were just arriving, one audit trail at a time. The audit didn't arrive with dramatic announcements. It materialized as calendar blocks titled Review and Follow-Up, scheduled by people who never participated in overnight calls and never asked how outages were resolved. They didn't need explanations. They had timelines, system logs, emails, signed agreements with vastly different amounts for essentially identical roles. Amaya disappeared first. Officially, she was pursuing other opportunities. Unofficially, her name simply stopped appearing in company directories. When someone's been with an organization for 9 years and then vanishes without a farewell email, you know the decision wasn't mutual. Derek lasted longer. He attempted to fill the vacuum, started posting frequent updates, volunteering for calls, speaking louder in meetings. But visibility functions both ways. When people started asking detailed questions about security protocols and incident response procedures, his answers became thin rapidly. He wasn't incompetent. He simply didn't understand the systems the way he'd believed he did. And now everyone could observe it clearly. For weeks after I'd walked out, a recruiter I'd spoken with years earlier contacted me. Day shift position at a larger technology company here in Seattle. Comparable technical scope, but with genuine career advancement and a team that understood what cybersecurity work actually involved. The conversation differed from any job interview I'd experienced in years. They didn't ask me to justify my experience or prove my value. They'd already conducted their research. They knew about the incident at Helion, knew about the retention program, knew that companies sometimes make expensive mistakes about who they choose to keep. We're not looking for someone to resolve problems in isolation, the hiring manager said. We're looking for someone to build defensive frameworks that prevent problems from occurring in the first place. The offer came back with a $22,000 base salary increase over what I'd been making, superior health benefits, and no retention agreement required. They wanted me because of what I could contribute, not because they were frightened I'd leave. I accepted it the same afternoon. Human Resources at Helion emailed me midweek. Careful wording, no apology. They wanted to close the loop on my employment status. I replied with a clean resignation letter. 2 paragraphs, no accusations, just facts. Last day worked. Reason for departure. Misalignment of role scope and compensation structure. Legal approved it within 2 hours. That communicated everything I needed to know. They weren't attempting to retain me anymore. They were attempting to reduce their liability exposure. I transferred access credentials the way I always had. Documented, complete, professional. I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't delete files or corrupt data. I didn't need to. The damage was already done by people who believed expertise was easily replaceable and loyalty was inexpensive. Derek lasted the full 18 months, but he never received another bonus. That was the genuine karma. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just a 31-year-old watching his career plateau while he discovered how much he didn't actually understand. He left 7 months after his retention period concluded. Last I heard, he was doing infrastructure support somewhere in Portland. As for me, the first time my phone rang at 2 a.m. at the new position, it was a wrong number. I silenced it and returned to sleep without thinking about threat levels or client service agreements or whether someone would blame me if I didn't resolve something before morning. Because walking out at 3:15 a.m. wasn't the dramatic part. The dramatic part was realizing I didn't have to prove my worth by being perpetually exhausted anymore. They paid to keep the wrong person, and I just stopped pretending that was my responsibility to fix. My son starts his senior year in the fall. Already received early acceptance to 3 music conservatories. And for the first time in years, I'm not worried about how we'll afford it. The new position's educational assistance program covers half, and the salary increase covers the rest with room to spare. But the real victory isn't financial. It's simpler than that. I sleep through the night now. When my phone buzzes at 2 a.m., it's usually just a text from my son asking if I heard him practicing earlier, asking if I thought he was ready for his audition. I always text back the same thing: more than ready. More than you know. 19 years I spent believing that if I just worked diligently enough, stayed loyal enough, resolved enough problems that other people couldn't, I'd eventually be valued the way I deserved. It took a $37,000 retention bonus gap to teach me something every 44-year-old woman should already know. Your worth isn't determined by how much punishment you're willing to absorb. Sometimes the best revenge is just refusing to be undervalued anymore. Everything else takes care of itself. 3 months into my new position, something interesting happened. I was sitting in a security architecture meeting, daytime, normal business hours, surrounded by colleagues who actually understood the technical complexities we were discussing, when my phone buzzed with a LinkedIn message. It was from Robert Sullivan. "Ophelia, I hope you're doing well. I wanted to reach out personally. We've completed our operational review at Helion, and some significant changes have been made to our compensation structure and overnight staffing model. I take full responsibility for not recognizing the disparity in how we valued your contributions. If you'd ever consider returning, we'd be prepared to offer a substantially different arrangement." I read it twice. Then I looked around the conference room at my new team, at the whiteboard covered in architecture diagrams, at the afternoon sunlight coming through the windows. I typed back, "I appreciate you reaching out, Robert. I'm very happy where I am. But I'd suggest you use whatever you were planning to offer me to properly compensate whoever you have covering nights now. They deserve better than I got." I never heard back from him. The following week I ran into someone at a cybersecurity conference who'd worked at Helion. She'd been one of the analysts on day shift, someone I'd trained years ago. "Ophelia," she said, looking genuinely relieved to see me. "I'm so glad you got out. You have no idea what happened after you left." I smiled. "Actually, I have some idea. No, I mean, the audit was brutal. They discovered that Amaya had been systematically suppressing night shift performance reviews for years. Apparently she believed that if night shift personnel got promoted, it would create staffing problems for overnight coverage. So she just kept everyone capped at meets expectations regardless of actual performance." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. For how long? At least 7 years based on what they found. HR is still investigating. There's talk of legal action from some former employees. 7 years. 7 years of performance reviews that could have led to promotions, salary increases, career advancement. All deliberately suppressed because it was more convenient for the company to keep experienced people trapped in overnight shifts than to develop proper 24-hour coverage models. What about Derek? I asked. She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Derek was Amaya's mentee. That's why he got the huge bonus. She was grooming him to take over her role eventually. The whole retention program was basically designed to reward her favorites while keeping everyone else in place. And they let this happen for 7 years? Nobody was paying attention. Night shift was invisible until you left and everything fell apart. Then suddenly executives started asking questions nobody wanted to answer. I thought about all those nights. All those incidents I'd resolved alone. All those times I'd trained new analysts, updated outdated protocols, prevented breaches that would have destroyed the company's reputation. All while being systematically prevented from advancing because it was operationally convenient. I should be angrier, I said. But mostly I just feel tired thinking about it. You should feel vindicated, she said firmly. You know how many people left after you did? 11. 11 people in cybersecurity operations alone, once word got around about the retention bonus disparity and the performance review suppression. The company's still trying to recover. 11 people. I'd thought I was alone in being undervalued, but apparently I'd just been the most visible example of a systemic problem. What about you? I asked. Are you still there? 2 more weeks, she said. I've got an offer from a cloud security company. Better pay, better culture, actual opportunities for advancement. You leaving made a lot of us realize we didn't have to accept being treated like that. After the conference, I sat in my hotel room and thought about that number. 11 people. 11 cybersecurity professionals who'd decided they deserved better, all because I'd walked away from an attack at 3:15 in the morning. I hadn't set out to start some kind of exodus. I'd just reached my breaking point and acted on it. But apparently that was all it took. One person refusing to accept being undervalued and suddenly everyone else started questioning whether they should accept it either. My phone rang. Unknown number but with a Seattle area code. I answered it. Is this Ophelia Rivers? Yes. My name is Catherine Brooks. I'm an attorney representing several former Helion employees in a class action lawsuit regarding discriminatory compensation practices. Your name has come up several times in our investigation. I was hoping we could talk. I sat up straighter. What kind of lawsuit? Without getting into details over the phone. Systematic suppression of performance reviews, discriminatory retention bonus allocation, and retaliation against employees who questioned compensation practices. We believe we have a strong case, but we need testimony from people who experienced the pattern directly. I didn't experience retaliation, I said. I just left. You left after being offered a retention bonus that was $37,000 less than a male colleague with less experience and fewer documented achievements. That's not retaliation, but it's evidence of the discriminatory pattern we're documenting. Male colleague. She'd said it so casually, but that word hung in the air. I'd been so focused on the work itself, on the technical disparities and the operational inequities, that I hadn't let myself think about the other dimension. How many of those 11 people who left were women? How many of the people trapped in overnight shifts with suppressed performance reviews were women? How many of the people who received the largest retention bonuses were men? I'll think about it, I said. That's all I ask. I'll send you some information. No pressure, but your testimony could be valuable. Not just for any potential settlement, but for establishing accountability. After she hung up, I sat there for a long time, thinking about patterns I'd been too close to see clearly. Derek wasn't the problem. Amaya wasn't even really the problem. They were symptoms of a system that undervalued certain people's contributions while overvaluing others, and nobody had questioned it because the system worked well enough for the people it benefited. I opened my laptop and started writing down everything I could remember. Not emotionally, not angrily. Just factually. Dates, incidents, disparities. The Christmas Eve breach I'd handled while Derek was at a party. The zero-day vulnerability I'd identified and patched. The outdated protocols I'd rewritten on my own time. The analysts I'd trained who were then promoted past me. The retention bonuses. The performance review caps. The systematic invisibility of night shift contributions. By the time I finished, I had 17 pages of documentation. Not because I was planning to join the lawsuit. I hadn't decided that yet. But because writing it down made it real in a way it hadn't been when it was just my experience. I'd spent 19 years believing that working harder would eventually be recognized. That being indispensable would eventually be rewarded. That loyalty would eventually be valued. Instead, being indispensable just made me too valuable to promote. Being loyal just made me too reliable to worry about. Working harder just meant they could avoid fixing systemic problems because I'd work around them. The real revenge wasn't walking out at 3:15 a.m. The real revenge was finally understanding that my worth wasn't defined by how much I could tolerate. And once I understood that, once I truly internalized it, everything else became clear. I didn't owe them my expertise. I didn't owe them my availability. I didn't owe them anything beyond what they were willing to properly compensate. And $5,000 wasn't proper compensation. It was an insult dressed up as appreciation. I called Catherine Brooks back the next morning. "I'll testify," I said. "Not for the money. For accountability." "That's all we're asking for," she said. The lawsuit took 14 months to resolve. I won't go into details because of the settlement agreement, but I'll say this. Halion Technical Solutions implemented significant changes to their compensation practices, performance review processes, and overnight staffing models. They also wrote a substantial check, which I split between my son's education fund and a cybersecurity scholarship fund for women at the University of Washington. Derek reached out to me once during that time. A brief email, carefully worded, probably reviewed by his own attorney. "Ophelia, I want you to know I had no idea about the performance review situation. I just took the bonus they offered. I didn't know how much yours was, and I didn't know about the systematic issues. I'm sorry." I read it several times, trying to decide if I believed him. Trying to decide if it mattered whether I believed him. Finally, I wrote back, "I appreciate the apology. I don't think you set out to benefit from a discriminatory system. But you did benefit from it and you didn't question it. That's something we both have to live with." He never responded. I didn't expect him to. 2 years later, I'm the senior architect for cybersecurity operations at my new company. I manage a team of 14 people across all shifts. We rotate day and night coverage quarterly so nobody gets trapped in overnight work indefinitely. Our retention bonuses are transparent and based on objective metrics. Our performance reviews are conducted by multiple reviewers to prevent individual bias. Our compensation structure is regularly audited for equity. None of this happened because I'm some kind of crusader or activist. It happened because when I was hired, they asked me what I'd learned from my previous position, and I told them the truth. Sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic or cinematic. It's building something better than what broke you. It's using your experience to prevent other people from having the same experience. It's refusing to perpetuate the same systems that undervalued you. My son graduated last spring with a degree in music performance. Full scholarship to a conservatory, merit-based, earned entirely on his own talent and discipline. He's playing professionally now, teaching on the side, building a career in something he loves. He called me last week after one of his performances. "Mom,